Once upon a time, in a big city in Nigeria called Lagos, there lived a very rich boy named Tunde. Tunde was 16 years old, and his parents owned a large business. He always wore the best clothes, drove fancy cars, and had everything he wanted. But there was one thing about Tunde: he was not kind to people who were not as rich as he was. One day, Tunde went with his friends to a fancy restaurant. The restaurant was filled with expensive chairs, shiny tables, and food that smelled delicious. The place was very crowded, so the waiters were busy running around, trying to serve all the people. One of the waiters, a boy named Femi, was about the same age as Tunde but did not have much. Femi's parents were poor, and he had to work hard at the restaurant to help them buy food and pay rent. Tunde and his friends laughed loudly as they ordered plates of rice, chicken, and soft drinks. Femi came to serve them. He carefully carried a tray filled with food, but as he reached their table, he tripped over someone's foot and spilled some soup on Tunde's shirt. Tunde's face turned red with anger. "How dare you?" he shouted, standing up so quickly that his chair fell over. "You just ruined my shirt. Do you know how much this costs?" Femi bowed his head in fear. "I'm so sorry, sir," he said softly. "It was an accident. I didn't mean to." But Tunde wasn't listening. He pushed Femi and said loudly so everyone could hear, "You're nothing but a poor waiter. You should be careful, or you'll lose this job. People like you don't belong in places like this." The restaurant became quiet. Everyone was watching. Femi felt embarrassed, but he didn't say anything. He just wiped the spilled soup and quietly walked away, his face burning with shame. Tunde's friends laughed and clapped their hands. They thought it was funny. As the night went on, Tunde forgot about the incident. He enjoyed his meal, joked with his friends, and didn't care that he had hurt someone's feelings. He was rich and powerful, after all. But what Tunde didn't know was that things were about to change. The next day, Tunde's father came home from work with a worried look on his face. "Tunde," he said, "we have a big problem. Our business is in trouble. We might lose everything." Tunde was shocked. "What do you mean, Dad? We are rich." His father sighed and shook his head. "We were rich. But now, we owe a lot of money, and I don't know how we're going to pay it back. The bank might take our house and everything we own." Tunde felt scared. For the first time, he understood what it felt like to have nothing. Over the next few weeks, things got worse. The family had to sell their cars, their big house, and all their expensive things. Soon, Tunde and his parents were living in a small apartment. They had to sell everything just to survive. Tunde's friends stopped talking to him. They no longer invited him to parties or hung out with him. He felt lonely and sad. One day, Tunde's mother told him, "We need more money to pay the rent, and we can't afford school fees right now. You will need to find a job." Tunde couldn't believe his ears. He had never worked before. But there was no other choice. So, Tunde went to different places, asking for a job, but nobody wanted to hire him because he didn't have any experience. Finally, Tunde found a small restaurant that needed extra help. He went inside, feeling nervous. As he waited, a familiar face appeared. It was Femi, the waiter he had humiliated a few weeks ago. Femi was now the manager of the restaurant. Tunde's heart sank. He thought Femi would never give him a job. But to his surprise, Femi smiled and said, "Hello, Tunde. What brings you here?" Tunde stammered, I need a job." Femi looked at him quietly for a moment and then said, "I see. Well, I need some extra help here, and you seem to be in need of work." Tunde's eyes widened in shock. Femi wasn't angry. He wasn't going to make fun of him. Instead, Femi was being kind. Tunde nodded and whispered, "Thank you." From that day, Tunde worked as a waiter in the same restaurant where he once humiliated Femi. It was hard work, and sometimes people were rude to him, just like he had been to Femi. But Tunde learned to be patient, to be kind, and to treat people with respect no matter who they were. One day, after a long shift, Tunde sat down with Femi. "I'm sorry for the way I treated you before," he said. Femi smiled and said, "It's okay. We all make mistakes. What matters is that you've learned from it." Tunde nodded. He had learned a valuable lesson that being rich doesn't make someone better than others. It's kindness and respect that truly matter. And from that day on, Tunde and Femi became good friends, helping each other in any way they could. Tunde worked hard at the restaurant for several months. Every morning, he woke up early, dressed in his plain uniform, and hurried to catch the bus. It was not like the old days when his driver would drop him off at school in a shiny car. But Tunde didn't complain. He was starting to understand what it meant to work for every naira. Femi was a kind boss. He treated all his workers fairly and even taught Tunde how to do his job better. They would sometimes talk during breaks, sharing stories about their families and life in the city. Although Tunde had once humiliated Femi, Femi never brought it up again. He believed in giving people second chances. One evening, after closing the restaurant, Femi invited Tunde to join him for a walk by the beach. The sky was orange as the sun began to set, and a cool breeze blew gently over the waves. "I've been thinking," Femi said, looking out at the water. "You've changed a lot since you started working here. You're not the same person who walked into the restaurant that day." Tunde nodded. "I didn't know how hard life could be before. I thought having money meant everything. But now, I see things differently. You were kind to me when I didn't deserve it. I want to be like that too." Femi smiled. "That's a good lesson to learn, Tunde. Life isn't always easy, but when we help each other, it gets better." As they walked, Tunde asked, "Femi, how did you become the manager here?" Femi chuckled. "It wasn't easy. My parents didn't have much, and I had to drop out of school to help them. But I worked hard, starting as a dishwasher. I learned everything about the restaurant business, and the owner noticed. When he retired, he trusted me to take care of the place." Tunde was amazed. He had never thought about how hard people like Femi had to work just to survive. He felt a deep respect for his friend. But life wasn't done teaching Tunde lessons. One day, a group of rich kids came to the restaurant, laughing loudly and ordering expensive food just like Tunde had once done. Among them was a boy named Bolu, who had been one of Tunde's closest friends when he was rich. Bolu recognized Tunde as he carried their drinks to the table. His eyes grew wide with surprise, and he burst out laughing. "Tunde, is that really you? Serving drinks in a restaurant?" The other kids at the table laughed too. Tunde felt his face grow hot with embarrassment. He wanted to hide, but he remembered Femi's words about kindness. So, he took a deep breath and said, "Yes, I work here now. Do you need anything else?" Bolu shook his head in disbelief. "Man, how the mighty have fallen. You were the coolest guy at school, and now you're a waiter. What happened to you?" Tunde swallowed hard but stayed calm. "Life happened. Things changed. But I'm learning, and that's what matters." Bolu wasn't done mocking him. "You used to be rich. Now look at you, serving me. How does that feel?" Before Tunde could answer, Femi appeared. "Is there a problem here?" he asked in a calm voice, though his eyes were serious. Bolu sneered. "No problem. We were just reminding our old friend where he belongs now." Femi looked at Tunde and then back at Bolu. Everyone deserves respect, no matter where they work. Being a waiter doesn't make someone less important. Bolu rolled his eyes. "Whatever, man. We'll finish our food and leave." As Bolu and his friends ate, Tunde felt a strange mix of emotions. He was hurt by their words, but he was also proud of how he handled the situation. He had changed, he knew that now. He wasn't the same arrogant boy who had once humiliated Femi. Later that night, when the restaurant was empty, Femi came over to Tunde and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did well today. You didn't let them get to you." Tunde smiled, feeling grateful for Femi's support. "I learned from the best," he said. As time passed, Tunde grew more confident in his job. He saved some of the money he earned to help his family, and he also started thinking about how he could return to school. He knew that education was important, and he wanted to build a better future for himself. One afternoon, Tunde's father came to the restaurant. He looked tired, but there was a hopeful smile on his face. "Tunde," he said, "I've been working hard, trying to fix things, and I finally got a new job. It's not as big as our old business, but it's enough to take care of us. Things are going to get better. Tunde felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He hugged his father tightly. I'm so happy, Dad. I've been saving money too. Maybe we can get back on our feet sooner than we thought. His father nodded. We will, son. And I'm proud of how strong you've been. You've grown so much. Later that evening, Tunde sat down with Femi to share the good news. My dad got a new job, and things are starting to look up, Tunde said excitedly. Femi smiled. That's wonderful, Tunde. You've worked hard, and you deserve this. As they talked, Tunde realized something important. Femi, he said, when things get better, I want to help you too. You've done so much for me, and I want to give back. Femi looked at him, surprised. Help me? How? Tunde thought for a moment. Maybe we can find a way to grow the restaurant business together. You're great at managing, and I've learned a lot from working here. Together, we could make this place even better. Femi nodded slowly, thinking about the idea. That sounds interesting, Tunde. Let's work on it. From that day on, Tunde and Femi began planning ways to improve the restaurant. They brainstormed ideas, thought about new dishes to add to the menu, and even talked about how to attract more customers. They were excited about the future, and Tunde felt proud that he was no longer just a spoiled rich kid. He was learning, growing, and building something meaningful with a true friend. Tunde had lost everything, but in losing, he had gained something much more valuable: humility, friendship, and a new purpose in life. Tunde and Femi's friendship grew stronger by the day. But as Tunde's life began to improve, a dark shadow loomed over the city. Crime rates in Lagos were rising, and many businesses were being targeted by gangs demanding money for protection. Femi's restaurant, a small but growing business, soon caught the attention of these criminals. One late evening, after closing the restaurant, Tunde and Femi were counting the day's earnings when they heard a loud knock at the door. Femi frowned. Who could that be at this time? Tunde felt uneasy. I don't know, but it doesn't sound friendly. Femi cautiously opened the door, and 3 rough-looking men barged in. The leader, a tall man with a scar across his face, walked up to Femi with a menacing smile. Evening, boss. We've been watching your little business here. You've done well for yourself. Femi's heart raced. What do you want? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The man with the scar chuckled. It's simple. You pay us a little something every week, and we'll make sure nothing bad happens to your restaurant. You wouldn't want any trouble, would you? Tunde clenched his fists. He had heard about these gangsters who went around demanding money from local businesses. If they refused, things would get ugly. But he didn't want to back down. We're not paying you anything, he said firmly. The scarred man turned to Tunde, his smile disappearing. Who's this? Your new waiter. You should teach him to stay quiet. Femi quickly stepped forward, trying to defuse the situation. Listen, we don't want any trouble. But we don't have extra money to give you. We're just trying to run an honest business. The scarred man's eyes narrowed. Honest business? In this city? You must be new here. We run things around here. If you don't pay, something might happen to your restaurant, or to you. Femi hesitated, but Tunde stepped forward again. Leave us alone, he said boldly. We don't need your protection. The man with the scar grinned coldly. You'll regret this. With that, he and his men turned and left, slamming the door behind them. Femi sighed heavily, his hands trembling. Tunde, that was dangerous. We can't afford to get on their bad side. Tunde shook his head. We can't live in fear, Femi. If we give them money once, they'll keep coming back. But deep down, Tunde knew they were in trouble. The gang was powerful, and they weren't the kind to let things go easily. Over the next few days, the atmosphere around the restaurant became tense. Femi and Tunde were always looking over their shoulders, wondering when the gang would come back. Then, one evening, their worst fears came true. It was late, and the restaurant had just closed. Tunde was cleaning the tables while Femi finished counting the money. Suddenly, they heard a loud crash from the kitchen. They rushed to see what had happened and found that one of the windows had been smashed. A burning bottle of kerosene had been thrown inside, setting the curtains on fire. "Fire!" Tunde shouted. He grabbed a bucket of water and tried to put out the flames while Femi called for help. The fire spread quickly, and within minutes, the kitchen was filled with thick smoke. They managed to control the fire before it spread to the dining area, but much of the kitchen was destroyed. As they stood outside, watching the firefighters deal with the aftermath, Femi shook his head in disbelief. "They did this to scare us," he said. "They're not going to stop unless we pay them." Tunde felt a deep anger rising inside him. "We can't let them get away with this. We have to fight back." But Femi wasn't so sure. "Fight them? Tunde, these people are dangerous. They have guns, and they control half the city. If we try to fight them, we could get killed." Tunde knew Femi was right, but he couldn't stand the thought of living in fear. He remembered his old life of luxury, where he never had to worry about anything, and now, here he was, facing criminals who wanted to take everything from them. He felt powerless, but he wasn't willing to give up. The next day, Tunde decided to visit an old family friend, Uncle Kola. Uncle Kola was a retired police officer who had connections in the city. Tunde told him everything, the gang's threats, the fire, and the danger they were facing. Uncle Kola listened carefully, then leaned back in his chair. "These gangs have been a problem in Lagos for a long time," he said. "They're well organized, and they know how to stay out of the police's reach. But that doesn't mean we can't do something." Tunde looked at him hopefully. "What can we do?" Uncle Kola thought for a moment. "First, you need to protect the restaurant. Install cameras, hire a security guard, and make sure you're prepared in case they come back. Second, we need to gather evidence. If we can catch them in the act, we might be able to get the police involved. But it won't be easy." Tunde thanked Uncle Kola and hurried back to the restaurant to tell Femi the plan. At first, Femi was hesitant. "I don't want to make things worse," he said. "What if they retaliate?" Tunde placed a hand on his shoulder. "Femi, if we do nothing, they'll destroy us anyway. We have to stand up for ourselves. We'll be careful, but we can't just let them win." Reluctantly, Femi agreed. They installed security cameras around the restaurant, hired a guard, and started documenting every interaction they had with the gang. But as the days passed, the tension grew. They knew the gang wouldn't wait long to strike again. One evening, as the restaurant was about to close, the scarred man returned, this time with more men. They stormed into the restaurant, pushing tables over and threatening the customers. Femi quickly pressed the alarm button, alerting the police. But the gang wasn't in a hurry to leave. The scarred man walked up to Tunde, glaring at him. "I warned you," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You should have paid when you had the chance." Tunde stood tall, refusing to back down. "We're not afraid of you." The man raised his hand to strike Tunde, but before he could, the restaurant door burst open, and the police rushed in. Uncle Kola had come through. The gang members were arrested, and the scarred man was dragged away, shouting threats. As the police took them away, Femi breathed a sigh of relief. "We did it, Tunde. We stood up to them." Tunde nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and exhaustion. They had won this battle, but he knew the fight wasn't over. The city was full of challenges, but he had learned that courage, friendship, and standing up for what was right were far more valuable than any riches he once had. Tunde and Femi rebuilt the restaurant, and their bond grew even stronger. They had faced danger together and survived. The experience had changed them both. They were no longer just a rich boy and a poor waiter, they were partners, united in their fight for a better life. And so, in the busy city of Lagos, where danger and opportunity walked hand in hand, Tunde and Femi learned that true strength didn't come from money, but from standing tall in the face of fear.